Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 5th of April 2022. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin with the outcry that has come from across the world as far as the killings of many scores of, in fact, people in Ukraine is concerned. The outrage comes from the United States, it comes from Germany, it comes from different other countries as well. Different countries across the world have taken a reaction as far as the Russian action in Ukraine is concerned, whether it be Germany that has expelled 40 Russian diplomats, Lithuania that has thrown out its Russian ambassador, or other countries including Italy that are following suit. There are many countries that are reacting to it, and also US is asking for a more tougher sanction as far as Russia is concerned. And there are images of grisly bodies that are up there that have been put on social media as well. What is the world going to move forward, and how is it going to move forward as far as this crisis in Ukraine is concerned, whether it be from the Ukrainian side in the West, whether it be from the Russian side? This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns also this crisis in Ukraine and how economically this crisis is going to affect not only countries of the world, the West, Ukraine itself, Russia, but also countries that are developing, including Pakistan. The global benchmark Brent crude has increased. It is up $1.94. US West Texas Intermediate crude has also risen by $2.5. Trading has been volatile as well. The global economy has been impacted, and it is estimated that it is going to further be impacted by this crisis. This is going to be our second segment. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking you to Rajasthan, where some Hindu activists have set houses, shops, and other properties of Muslims on flames in the Karauli city of the Indian state of Rajasthan. This was stated in different news stories from India as well and across the world and international media. This anti-Muslim rally, as is the norm in India, was broken out following a bike rally by Hindu extremist groups to celebrate the start of the new Hindu year. And if we remember well, they also said that there should be no meat that should be put on sale during this festivities. This is going to be our third story. Our fourth and final story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns North Korea, that it could use nuclear weapons if it is attacked. Now, Kim Jong-un's sister, who is quite active in politics as well, has said that a preemptive attack on North Korea would be an unimaginably terrible disaster. And this has come because Seoul's defense minister has said that South Korea's missile strike capabilities had improved. So this came as a reaction to this quote by the South Korean defense minister. A lot of tensions everywhere, and of course we are going to discuss that in detail. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, that concerns Ukraine. The issue that concerns the Ukrainian crisis, the way the countries across the world in the West have reacted to this crisis, the allegation that Russia has piled up scores of bodies inside of Kiev and other parts of Ukraine, which are also on display on different forms of social media. What kind of impact is this going to have politically on Ukraine, on Russia, on different countries in the West? We know that different countries across the world are reacting to Russia. There are different countries that have expelled the Russian diplomats as well, starting from Germany that expelled 40 Russian diplomats, Lithuania that threw out its Russian ambassador. Also, the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, has left the capital. He is doing a round trip since the war began 6 weeks ago to see for himself what has happened. A lot of people are also calling this genocide. Is it or is it not? 40th day, ladies and gentlemen, of this crisis that has begun between Russia and Ukraine. Jauhar Saleem Saab, ambassador to Italy, joins us online. Jauhar Saleem Saab, if you can hear us, I would like to have your point of view because you understand Europe extremely well on how Europe is reacting to this crisis and how intensified this drive from European Union is going to be in the days to come as far as this crisis is concerned.
Thank you. The reaction from Europe has been unprecedented in many ways, and that is understandable because the Western Europe, European Union, countries, they feel threatened by the Russian action in Ukraine. Although it had been a long time in the coming, as you know, 8 years back, this crisis started in earnest when a pro-Russian leader of Ukraine, he refused to go ahead with the integration process, economic integration process with the European Union, which the people of Ukraine apparently at that time supported. So there was a military action at the time, and now we see a renewed military action in Ukraine by Russia. This time around, it has been much more broad-based, involves the whole of Ukraine, more or less. And that's why the European countries have come up with a very strong reaction, not just in political terms, in terms of the diplomatic actions that you've mentioned, or some ways restrict relations with Russia, but also in economic terms. A very strict regime of economic sanctions have been imposed on Russia, and day by day, that is being further tightened.
All right,
Now, these
Ambassador
reports
Saab, I'd like to ask about Italy as well. Italy has now expelled 30 Russian diplomats. The foreign minister of Italy says his country has expelled these diplomats for national security reasons. Germany has also expelled, Lithuania has expelled, and other countries are following suit as well. Do you feel this is going to further intensify this current state of affairs as far as the Ukrainian crisis is concerned?
Now, these are important steps and show the mindset or the perspective of major European countries right now in terms of this crisis. Germany, it may be recalled, has had extensive economic relations with Russia. And in fact, Chancellor Merkel, when she was the chancellor, had been an advocate of maintaining those relations. Despite a lot of US pressure, she had refused to suspend that oil pipeline cooperation with Russia, the Nord Stream project. Similarly, Italy is another country in Europe which had very close economic relations with Russia. But now we see a major change in both these countries, which were actually deemed closer to Russia than other Western countries, such as the UK or France, for instance. So we see, in fact, in Italy, I could just mention that some days ago, President Zelensky was invited to speak to a joint session of Italian Parliament, and that he, of course, he did it through a video link, and that standing ovation minutes. So that shows the mood in Europe, that shows the mood in Italy, that shows the mood in Germany, in France, and other countries. And I think in the coming days, we could see the mood getting more intense.
All right, Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem, when it comes to this intensification of this current crisis, do you feel that in the days to come, with the pressure mounting on Russia, that Russia might reverse some of its actions, or do you feel Russia is going to be adamant as far as its point of view is concerned?
Now, as you all know, the negotiations have begun. Turkey has sponsored those negotiations, and both sides are talking, which is a good sign, because this is what we have been saying, and many countries have been saying, that eventually the way out is through peaceful negotiations. Unfortunately, in the recent days, in some of the areas that have been recaptured or vacated by the Russian troops, depending upon what perspective you take, there have been reports of atrocities, scores of dead bodies have been found, depicting that there have been some, as per some countries, some Western countries, war crimes, as per some brutal action. So I think that has mitigated the atmosphere for now. So we'll see how that goes in the coming days. But I can share that, what the reports that we see about the negotiations, there was significant progress in those talks. And in fact, the way was paved for direct negotiations between President Zelensky and President Putin at some point in time. That could have been very, very helpful. But now we have to see that these latest reports about the atrocities, the alleged atrocities by the Russian troops, how that out in the coming days.
Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem, I understand the 2 rounds of negotiations that happened. The second round was more constructive, and the outcome, as was seen by the reactions from both the sides, seemed to be very optimistic, very positive. And as you said, it might pave the way for a meeting between the two leaders. Although there's a lot of negation of that from the sides, nevertheless, there is a little bit of hope. But in all of this hope, there is also a lot of sanctions, as you yourself said, that the EU is going to put more sanctions as far as Russia is concerned. Then Russia has been taken out of the UNHRC, and the Russian side has slammed the United States and the British efforts to suspend it from this UNHRC. I mean, there are efforts that it has not been suspended, but there are efforts to suspend it from the UNHRC. Then the US has also stopped the Russian bond payments. Of course, these are for a sovereign debt of more than 600 million from reserves that were of Russian reserves that were in American banks. Now, this has been suspended by America as well. In all of these pressure tactics or sanctions that are being put on Russia through the West, which is the side, in your point of view, that both Ukraine and Russia are going to take in the days to come if negotiations fail?
Well, if negotiations fail, then of course we could see an intensification of the military activity in Ukraine. We already know that the West has decided to support the Ukrainian side in terms of providing them arms. In fact, Ukraine is perhaps the fourth largest recipient of US military assistance at this point in time. And we see how effective those fingers and those javelins and those drones have been that have been provided by America and European countries to Ukraine. So we can see that. I think that the sanctions, these are very serious. The latest ones that you have at whereby the Russian funds in the US, which they were using to make the bond payments and other payments, have been now restricted. That could lead to a default on Russia. And a default is a very serious matter because that can lead to many economic problems for any country in the world. So these economic sanctions, they begin to pinch. And they are in many segments.
Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem, also there's the human rights angle to it all. The number of dead bodies that have been found inside of Ukraine, which are now being posted on social media as well, pictures and comments on those. On the other hand, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General has also said her office has registered more than 7,000 cases alleging Russian war crimes in the Kiev region. Then there's also talk of genocide as far as Ukraine is concerned. What is your point of view on that?
Well, all these reports that we see in media, they are alarming, of course. Pakistan has a very clear position. We believe, and of course, we support the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we do not support any military action as we see in Ukraine. And of course, in any conflict, the international law needs to be observed in terms of how any military conflict is to be conducted. So I think that is the point of view of Pakistan, and that is my point of view. But I think it's very important that we support the endeavors for peace, because as Pakistan has said, we want to be partners in peace and not in conflict. And those endeavors are what can eventually bring a way out of this very serious dilemma for both West and Russia, and of course for people of Ukraine. In a country of 44 million people, already we know that over 10 million people are displaced. So this is a great upheaval for Ukraine, for the neighboring countries, and for Europe. In fact, I see here in Europe, many European countries, populations at large have been affected, not just in terms of sort of emotion, but in terms of fuel prices, in terms of increased inflation, which has come about because of the situation in Ukraine. So I think that the important thing here is to see how this conflict could be brought to an end through dialogue.
Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem, in all of this hue and cry, whether it be human rights, whether it be economy, whether it be the right of the people of Ukraine or the rights of the people of Russia, do you feel all of this is being politicized to the benefit of certain sections in the world? I'm not saying East, I'm not saying West, but I'm just asking you whether politics has a large role to play with this current crisis. And do you feel that the vent that is being given from both the sides as far as the current situation is concerned has also a very important political angle to it?
Well, politics is everywhere. Of course, no conflict, whether it's political or military, can stay free from politics, of course. And then there are two sides to a conflict. There's the Russian perspective, and there's, of course, the Ukrainian perspective. And then there's the world perspective, and that there are shades of that. There's a European perspective, there's perspective of other countries. But the important thing here is, like I said before, this conflict should not be allowed to last, because that would not just create problems for Europe, but for the whole world. We already know the economic impact of this crisis, and even countries far beyond or far away from the theater of this conflict, such as Pakistan, they've already begun to be affected. The increase in oil prices, it's already taking a toll on our economy and the economy of many other countries. What is happening in Sri Lanka as we speak? They are in a major economic and financial crisis. So the countries could face it. The world, eventually the global economy could face recessionary environment because of that, and that could be very detrimental for many developing countries, such as Pakistan. So it's very important that all the actors, international actors, that is, they should support peace dialogue and peace process.
That's a very important point. Peace dialogue, Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem Sahab, you talk about peace and dialogue, but when you look around the world and you actually see how many countries are really advocating peace and dialogue, I see Pakistan, I see China, I don't see many other countries that are advocating talks or negotiations or peace between the two warring factions. Do you feel it suits the interests of certain sections or certain sectors of the world for this escalation to continue or to become more aggressive or intensified in the days to come?
I think most of the countries in Europe and other parts of the world, they have called for cessation of hostilities. Of course, many countries have called for withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine because they believe in territorial integrity of state, as Pakistan has said as well. So that is the so we cannot say that not many countries support peace or peace endeavors. I think countries do have this. Most countries do have this position because look, what is the other side of it? What will a military aggravation of military conflict achieve? There is a stalemate of sorts in Ukraine. And if this continues, it could go on for a fairly long period of time. And there'll be no victors in the end, in terms, because everybody would be a loser in a prolonged conflict. So that is why I think the world in general and countries close to Ukraine in particular and European Union, they would all benefit if there's a way out of this military conflict.
Ambassador Jauhar, Saleem Sahab, also there are reports of increased weaponization in and around Ukraine so that the Ukrainian side could become stronger in fighting the Russian side. In all of this context, do you feel also that the defense industries of certain countries have benefited a lot, and it goes, for something in their favor if escalations such as these continue? I understand that a lot of European countries are advocating for peace, so is Pakistan, so is China, negotiations and talks. But when you look at the actual situation on the ground as to what is happening in Ukraine and the way the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian media or even the Ukrainian prosecutor general is advocating for the human rights angle, for the other angles, and they're of course pinpointing at Russia. And from the Russian side, of course, they are negating the facts. They also negated the fact that all these killings that the Ukrainian side is saying are untrue. Nevertheless, what is the truth? How will we ever know what the real truth was? It all began with Russia not wanting Ukraine to join NATO, and from there it kind of escalated into what we are seeing right now. Do you also feel, this is the second part of my question, Ambassador Saab, do you also feel that at any point of time the West will be inclined to refrain from adding Ukraine into NATO?
Well, that has been a central theme to this whole conflict, because from a Russian perspective, they felt that they were being encircled by a sort of inclusion of countries which had been part of the former Soviet Union into NATO. So, and they drew a line on the sand, so to speak, that, okay, Ukraine cannot be part of NATO, come what may. And I think that there were countries in the West that understood this position, but there were others which did not as much. And that is, of course, the basis of the conflict in some ways. Now, what we see is many European countries, like, for instance, Italy, is calling for, the Italian Prime Minister said that he would want to see Ukraine in the European Union. See, so that's very interesting, because he didn't say in NATO, he said European Union. So the focus has shifted more towards economic integration rather than a defense and political integration of the sort NATO provides. So I think that point has to be addressed by the West, because many analysts would say that Russia has some genuine concerns or legitimate concerns in this regard, which need to be addressed by the West. And there could be a growing recognition of that in the West. But to reach that point where a serious endeavor is made to address Russian legitimate concerns, I think we have to move out of this conflict. So far as this conflict stays active, then the possibility of those bigger questions being addressed remains rather remote. So that is why I think it's very important that these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia succeed in an extent whereby conditions are created for further steps, or further talks on that set of theme.
That is so important, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem Saab, because talks and negotiations are the only way forward as far as any conflict is concerned. We've seen that in the past with Afghanistan, and we are seeing it right now in Ukraine. All this escalation of violence, of whatever is happening, is getting a human toll to it, and nobody wants loss of human lives. Everybody wants peace, and this is what needs to be advocated by all of the countries concerned, instead of aggravating or intensifying the current crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem Saab, to have joined us, to have given us your point of view, the European perspective as well as the Pakistani perspective on this crisis that is engulfing the Ukraine and Russian regions. Let's come to our second segment, and that also concerns Ukraine and the economic impact of the current crisis in Ukraine, not only within the region across Ukraine, but also across the world. More in the following report.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict is sending ripple effects across the world owing to complex interdependence of world economic order. The global impact of this war is becoming clear as oil prices have jumped about 2%. According to the International Energy Agency, Russia is the world's third largest oil producer, exporting 5 million barrels of crude a day, or about 12% of the global market, and sanctions will take 2.85 million barrels of Russian oil per day off the world market. The Washington-based lender World Bank has downgraded its economic outlook for East Asia and the Pacific in its recent report, citing rising inflation in the United States and slowing growth in China as risks to the region's growth. World Bank Vice President for East Asia and Pacific said in a statement that the economies of East Asia and the Pacific were recovering from the pandemic-induced shock, but war in Ukraine is weighing on growth momentum. The International Monetary Fund speculated that Ukraine war may fundamentally alter the global economic order. Underscoring gravity of situation, the UN Food Chief David Beasley warned that Ukraine war has created a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe and will have a global impact beyond anything we have seen since World War II. In order to avoid massive disruption of global economy, famine, destabilization, and humanitarian crisis, dialogue and diplomacy must be accorded primacy.
Now, the crisis in Ukraine is having an impact as far as the global economy or the economy of the region that circles Ukraine is concerned. We've seen the jump as far as oil is concerned. We've also seen the tensions because of the sanctions and how that is going to impact the economic situation across the world. Salman Shah, former finance minister, joins us online. Salman Shah Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Sir, we are seeing already the impact of this Ukrainian crisis as far as the economy and the global economy, in fact, is concerned, whether it be the oil prices, whether it be the commodities, whether it be the food chains. And a lot of concern has been shown by the United Nations, by the World Food Programme, by the IMF as well. What is your take on that? Where is all of this heading?
Look, it's a very dangerous situation because a couple of very important supply chains have been devastated, particularly in the energy sector. And the disruption in the energy sector affects every country one way or the other, particularly those countries which are highly dependent on imported energy. So in that sense, we have a very big crisis because lots of countries have to pay very high energy bills, which they cannot afford. This will destroy their macroeconomic stability. It will destroy their production systems and even communications, transports. All kinds of disruptions are happening, and this is on top of the pandemic, which has also created similar disruptions. So I think these disruptions are a bit too much for the global economy to be able to fathom everything and be able to come out unscathed. So I think that as we go forward, there is going to be a lot of red ink of countries' budgetary systems and their current account deficits, and the global financial system will come under a lot of tension.
Salman Shah Sahab, every common man across the world, whether it's developing countries or developed countries, wants three things. He wants proper food for himself and his family, he wants proper clothing, and he wants proper shelter. Now, David Beasley, who's the executive director of the World Food Programme, says there is already high food prices, and that is going to create a food shortage for those who cannot afford it. When one of the basic commodities for the common man is going to be not within his reach, is that not going to create a more global crisis than we expected, or maybe the West expected, as a result of the Ukrainian crisis?
Well, there is a global crisis, but at the local level, the impact would be enormous, particularly in countries which cannot afford all of this and where the systems are already weak, where the infrastructure.
All right, we are in a conversation with Salman Shah Sahab. There is some kind of a technical issue due to which we cannot hear him properly. As soon as we get back to him, or his voice will, of course, resume our conversation with him. Salman Shah Sahab, can you hear us now? The contact has been broken. We are, of course, trying to get in touch with the Salman Shah Sahab again. Nevertheless, we were talking about global economy, about economy of the developing states, about the economy of those states where the people cannot afford prices of the current food items that are slowly and steadily increasing, and also the oil prices. Salman Shah Sahab, thank you to have joined us again. Salman Shah Sahab, how much is are the food prices or the skyrocketing food prices related to the increase in oil and also the oil crisis as a result of what is happening in Ukraine?
I think partially this is related to the oil crisis because the full impact of the oil crisis is going to come in the months ahead. Already we saw that, particularly in Pakistan's case, the food prices made a very big jump because of our debt issues. We have a very huge external debt, and to service that debt, we don't have sufficient foreign reserves. And as a result, we were in an IMF program which mandates that we have to have a floating exchange rate. Now, as the exchange rate, as the rupee is devalued, the local price of food grains go up, and the biggest impact is on poor segments of society. So, on top of that, when we add in the energy side to it, the cost of production of the farmers goes up, and that also leads to an upward pressure in prices, particularly for the items which are in great demand, like wheat and sugar, oil, uh, vegetable oil, etc. And all of them are being affected by now global conditions. And this is very, very worrying. And we are seeing things happening in other countries, which hopefully we will be able to avoid. And on
All
top
right,
of
Salman
that,
Shah,
our,
yes, you were
our
saying.
own political instability is also adding to this crisis because this is the time when you have to really focus on economics, whereas in Pakistan, the entire focus is right now on politics.
All right, let's go beyond Pakistan, Salman Shah Sahab. Let's talk about IMF also because Pakistan is concerned with the IMF as well. It says Russia's invasion of Ukraine may fundamentally alter the global economic order. Do you agree or do you disagree?
I think it will definitely change the global financial system because the global financial system was built over the last 50, 70 years after the Second World War, primarily as a Western financial system which expanded globally. And now, when that financial system seems to be a tool for putting political pressures on governments with which the Western powers may not agree with, means that the financial system will have to change. And we already see that Russia is asking for payments in rubles, and maybe China is going to also start trading in yuan. And so we may see emergence of alternate financial systems, uh, which which would then mean that somehow the world is going to be divided amongst different political blocs. And this would not be a very good thing for a global economy.
So the geo-economy and geopolitics are going to somehow merge into one in the future, as per what I understand you've just said. Let's also talk about the Russian oil. We know that Russia produces a huge amount of oil, and that is a huge amount, and that a lot of that was used to be exported to Europe, some to China. China continues its trade as far as oil is concerned with Russia. India is also continuing to buy some oil from Russia. If Russia is not allowed to export oil to countries where it was normally exporting. Of course, we understand this issue is this crisis has already economically put a dent in Ukraine as well as in Russia. Do you feel it's going to further impact Russia economically if the sanctions, the economic sanctions that the European Union is placing, that other countries are placing, that the US is placing on Russia, will it further impact Russia economically?
Yes, I think, but the thing is that Europe uh, imports almost 40% of its gas from Russia. Now, to change that and ban the Russian imports is going to be a very difficult transition. And that means that 40% of their requirements would have to be obtained from other places, which basically would be the United States and maybe from the Middle East. And that means that there will be a shortage for lots of countries, particularly those countries which were dependent on Middle Eastern energy sources. So I think the whole thing is going to be very disruptive, and it will take time before the Russian oil goes to countries where they used to get uh, oil from the Middle East, and Middle Eastern gas might be going to Europe. So I think the entire adjustment process is not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. And at the same time, we can see that now there is talk that the Iranian oil might be allowed to come into the market, and therefore that may compensate to a certain extent. But the credibility of the entire global trading system and the global financial system is at stake. That how do we protect the global financial system and the global trading system from the politics of various countries? And that is a very big issue, which we will be talking about the coming decades.
The World Bank, you were talking of global economics. The World Bank has downgraded its economic outlook for East Asia and the Pacific, pointing towards war in Ukraine. We know that it's going to impact countries across the world, the developing countries and Asia as well. But coming back to Russia, do you feel, I mean, understanding economics much better, economy much better than I do, can Russia sustain if this current trend of economic sanctions and the issues, economic issues, I'm just concentrating on economic issues, that it is engulfed in, continue? How long can Russia sustain this?
Well, I think the Russians is a commodity economy, and so most of their exports deal with commodities, and the prices of commodities have really skyrocketed. And so, in the ultimate analysis, Russia is a beneficiary of all of this because if they can export it, then they will be able to get a good compensation for that. And that's why they are finding alternate markets and alternate means means of financing and trading. And I don't think Russia is going to be impacted to the extent we feel that the Western sanctions will hurt it. Of course, it hurts the global economy and it also hurts the Western economy. So I think ultimately we'll have to de-link politics from economics.
It's a very good point to de-link politics with economics, but unfortunately, Salman Shah Sahab, as you very well know, you can, in world politics, when you look at different events occurring across the world, one never dissociates the economy by the politics. In fact, politics play on the economy in order to further gain more pointage as far as their point of view is concerned, which brings me to the economic outlook across the world, or the inflation rate that has engulfed the world as well, or the growth rate that was estimated for different countries, including China, including the European Union and the United States of America. Under the current situation, do you feel all of this is going to change in the next 6 months? And as you pointed out yourself, that there could be alternate systems that could rise as a result of this issue. There could be, because of the ruble buying of oil, buying and selling of oil in rubles or in yuan. Is an alternate economic system beneficial for the world at large in the years to come, or do you feel there needs to be a single consensus as far as economic outlooks or the way the world economy works?
Well, in my opinion, I think that obviously if everybody has consensus and they depoliticize the trading and financial systems of the world, that would be the best option. But in case these are politicized, then it is better to have multiple systems where at least you have options and you can choose which option suits you best. It may add a little bit more to transaction costs, and that will be a negative for the entire thing. But until we can come to some kind of consensus and we can build a consensus post Ukraine or post, I guess, America-China relationship is settled on a more cooperative way, things will remain in limbo in a way. So I
Of course.
think that this is like in most transitions, there will be maybe some winners and some losers. And
Let's
uh,
hope, Salman Shah Sahab, that there are more winners than losers, and that the world economy at large is not impacted to the extent that some of the analysts are saying. I really also hope that in an extreme case, that these multiple ways of transactioning in different currencies moves forward so as to save the global economy, because at the end of the day, it's human lives at stake, not only human lives but also hunger across the world that is at stake as a result of crisis such as what we are watching right now. So let's hope for the best. Let's also hope for the negotiations to be successful between the two sides, so that maybe some kind of a pause comes as far as this current state of affairs is concerned. Thank you very much, Salman Shah Sahab, former finance minister, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the economic impact of the crisis in Ukraine. Let's come to our last two stories very quickly. The first, let's take you to India and Rajasthan, where Hindu activists have set Muslims' houses and shops ablaze. This was during a bike rally by Hindu groups celebrating the start of the new Hindu year in the Muslim-dominated locality. Curfew has been imposed from the 2nd to the 4th of April. Police say 35 people have been injured in the clashes. This happened in Karoli. And of course, we all know, and we have been talking about the way anti-Muslim sentiments are emanating inside of India because of the way it is being perpetrated by the RSS and the BJP and the Indian regime that is currently in place. And this is creating an extremely unfortunate and extremely disastrous situation, not only for India but for the Muslim community as well. So let's hope some kind of a reaction comes from the important bodies, but seeing the past, we won't see anything happening. Last story, ladies and gentlemen, comes from North Korea. Now, South Korean defense minister said in a statement, and I quote, he said the South's missile strike capabilities had improved. Now, as a result of this, the sister of the North Korean leader, the sister of Kim Jong-un, has said that a premeditated attack on North Korea would have an unimaginably terrible disaster. And this has again risen tensions between the two Koreas. The North Korea has also halted its long-range and missile testing after dual summits between Kim Jong-un and former US President in 2019. That happened in the past, but since then the tensions have further come back to its original position, and statements such as these and the reactions from the North Korean side that we expected also escalate tensions in the region. We already have tensions in Ukraine. We also have a humanitarian and economic issue in Afghanistan. Let's hope that the Koreas decide to move forward in a much more peaceful manner than go for an aggressive state of mind as well. Let's end it on this. A lot of aggression, a lot of issues concerning the world. All we hope for is peace, is for negotiation, is for the world to be as one, and the world to be a safe place to live in for every man, woman and child. With that, we come to an end of this day's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow, same time, same place. New stories, new segments, but of course concerning Pakistan and the world at large. Allah Hafiz.